Hello everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, 1987, they were finally able to recast James Bond. And Timothy Dalton brought something new to the table. He brought legitimacy that we haven't seen in a James Bond film since the 1960s, basically. And while some people complained about that it was a little boring, I will say this. I haven't read all of the James Bond novels, but the ones I've read, I've come to the conclusion that the actor I think resembles how I view James Bond best is actually Timothy Dalton. And let's take a look today at what I would consider the best James Bond film of the 1980s and one of my favorite Bond films of all time, The Living Daylights, even though I kind of prefers the Swedish title to the whole thing, Iskallt Uppdrag, or as it would translate to, The Ice Cold Mission. This movie begins in Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, where James Bond is helping out because a general is defecting to the west. The defection is successful and, the general is able to travel to Austria through the pipeline and stuff like that. That was a really fun sequence, by the way. But Bond gets some real criticism afterwards because he was reluctant to stop a sniper that apparently was going to shoot the general when he was going, running across the square. She was a woman that was playing the cello in a, concert that they were having, and the criticism is basically you wouldn't shoot at a woman holding a sniper rifle just because she's a beautiful woman. But James Bond thinks that she was not capable enough to actually pull the trigger on this one, and he starts to digging into her backstory. At the same time as this is happening, the now defected general is telling them that there is a new guy in Moscow that is going to kill British spies. Now, in first they don't believe it, but then it turns out that British spies are starting dying in various ways, and the Russians are also, through a very, very cool sequence, are able to steal the general back to Russia. After this intelligence debacle, James Bond gets the order to find and kill Leonid Pushkin, played by John Rhys-Davies, who is this new hardliner in Moscow. But James Bond is reluctant to do so. He doesn't believe they have enough evidence to suggest that he's actually behind this, and he thinks that there is some weird things going on here that his superiors doesn't see. This is actually the first time I think they've ever done this storyline, that James Bond has a mission that he doesn't want to do because he feels morally against doing so. I think they could have done a lot more with it, but they didn't. But they did enough so it made the movie feel a bit different from other James Bond films. So he tracks down the cello playing lady in Bratislava and actually is able to defect her into the west in an absolutely barnstorm of a sequence. The escape from Slovakia sequence is one of my favorite in James Bond history. It is an excellent combination of Cold War spy shit combined with the elegance of a James Bond sequence, aka chef's kiss. The thing is that then James Bond is trying to figure out what is actually going on here, and they're soon onto some kind of a drug arms deal thing in Afghanistan. The sequences in Afghanistan is a little bit more of classic desert action that is a little bit less cool than the sequences in Bratislava and the Cold War thing, but it is still very exciting and impressive, and I really like it. This movie has a glaring problem, and it is called the villains. It is what keeps this movie from absolute legendary status. Because we do have this Whitaker guy who is kind of set up as some kind of a villain or antagonist, but it doesn't feel like, the main antagonist. It feels like, the right-hand man for the actual villain, because we do have a surprise villain in this movie, but the thing is that they're keeping the reveal of him a bit vague, and I could, see where this one was going. If I can see where, a surprise villain is coming from, then everybody can see it, including a fucking blind squirrel. Neither of them really worked. Whitaker just felt like some right-wing lunatic gun nut, and our surprise villain that everybody could see was just a bit boring. So that thing kind of didn't work. But the rest of the movie is absolute gangbuster. It's very entertaining, it's very fast-paced, the action sequences are great, and I absolutely loved the relationship that James Bond had with Cara, the violin playing woman that was the assassin in the beginning of the movie. and it needs to be repeated. This is a James Bond film that is an actual spy film. It's kind of unusual when you're thinking about it. If you've never seen The Living Daylights and have just seen, the modern James Bond films, or if you've just seen the really old James Bond films and have, not seen the Timothy Dalton ones, this is fucking amazing. This is a classic James Bond film. This is an excellent James Bond film. I think Timothy Dalton is really good in this one, and it is just so refreshing to see a movie where they don't have an over-the-hill womanizer that is a bit too comfortable with his own ability and his own hairpiece unrelated picture of Roger Moore. So if you've never seen this movie, do see it, because it is really entertaining, exciting, suspenseful, and freaking amazing James Bond film. Lame villains and gun nuts be damned. This movie bags an easy 86 points. This is one of my favorite James Bond films of all time. Very suspenseful, and it actually pulls off the only twist I have ever seen in a James Bond film. Let just that thing sink in for a second. Escape from Slovakia is of course the movie's high point, but god damn it, the start of this movie ain't too shabby either, where they're having this war games thing in Gibraltar. That thing is epic, it is unique, and it is fucking amazing. So I'll see you next time from So and So reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching, thank you very much.